Chester Otto Weger was born on March 3, 1939 in Derby, Iowa, to Herschel Wayne Weger and Juanita Louise Percy, the family's only son, raised along with 5 daughters. The family settled in LaSalle County, Illinois in 1942 in a home in the woods with no water or power. At 18, Chester enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, but went AWOL from Camp Pendleton when he learned his girlfriend, Joanne Orth, was pregnant. They soon married and would have 2 children together, daughter Rebecca, and then 2 years later, a son named John. Chester worked odd jobs to support his family, including as a dishwasher at Starved Rock State Park. At 21 years old, he was accused of committing a triple homicide, subjected to interrogation, the threat of the electric chair, and psychological warfare. A month before his 22nd birthday, he was sentenced to life in prison. He would remain behind bars for the next 60 years, emerging in February of 2020 on parole, just 3 weeks before the official outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. In his 6 decades behind bars, Chester missed the civil rights movement, President Kennedy's assassination, the moon landing, the Vietnam War, Nixon's resignation, the advent of the first IBM electric typewriter, and the first Apple Macintosh personal computer. He missed the introduction and evolution of the cell phone, the disappearance of payphones, the first Iraq War, the introduction of the internet, 9/11, the second Iraq War, the introduction of smartphones, and almost every other radical change to the way society functions. The world he emerged into was not the cold gray cell he had known for 60 years, but it was a world of lockdowns, empty streets, and quarantines. And yet through all of this, Chester persevered. He kept going, he kept living, he kept professing his innocence. For 5 years after his release, he fought for his exoneration. On Wednesday, June 18, 2025, the state of Illinois denied Chester Weger's petition for clemency. 4 days later, on Sunday, June 22nd at 3:18 p.m., Chester died surrounded by his family. He is survived by his children, his nieces, his sister Mary, all of whom never gave up on their belief in his innocence. For 65 years, Chester's ultimate act of resistance was to simply survive. He outlived his accusers. He outlived those who used him as a pawn for their purposes. He kept living until he could get his day in court, and when the court did not give him the justice he deserved, he went to his eternal sleep. But he crossed the bridge from this world to the next with the hope that though he might not be here to witness his name cleared, his family would. And for them, the quest for justice continues.
Oh, Whitny Braun. That just brings tears to my eyes. That is so touching. Thank you for drafting that and sharing it with us. It's so good to have you back. This is the Starved Rock Murders. I'm your host, Andy Hale. Whitny Braun, so good to see you.
Same. Though, I wish it was under different circumstances. I wish.
I know.
There's, sometimes in your life you play out scenarios and you just are so sure a certain event is going to take place. And in my mind, it was the ruling was going to come back from the court and we were going to have this meeting to record this podcast, but we were going to be discussing something very different. And I would not be leading into this with Chester's obituary. I know. This is not a podcast. I love being here with you, but this is not the podcast I ever wanted to record.
Yeah. I looked it up. I went back to my little podcast app and it looks like our first episode was March 3rd, 2022.
Yeah.
So basically, 3.5 years. It's incredible to think that we've been on this journey that long. And if I could have fast forwarded back then to the final episode, I would have really hoped for and expected a happy ending. Mm-hmm. Chester deserved a happy ending. We proved our case, and I'm still so disappointed in kind of this puzzling court ruling. And that's where we're at. And as I've said to you before, it's also sad that Chester has passed. And, he's passed the torch to me to continue the quest for justice. But I have said this many times. I'm at peace in that we proved our case in court and here on this podcast over and over and over. We proved the case. So I want to do today, I want to just do a little reminiscing, kind of just talk about a lot of different things. So one of the things that just struck me when you read that intro you said at 18, he went to work at the Starved Rock Lodge. What a fateful decision that was. And I thought about it when you said that. When he hands in his employment application, little did he know that shortly thereafter, because he worked at that lodge, he'd be one of many that would have been, investigated, interrogated, questioned about the Starved Rock murders. And that he'd be the one that the crime got pinned on. He would be the fall guy. He would be the patsy. He'd be the guy that they coerced a confession from and then would have to give his life, to all those who falsely accused him and knew that he had nothing to do with it. And I just think of that decision. Instead of going to work at Starved Rock, if he'd have said, I'm going to work at a restaurant, I'm going to deliver papers, I'm going to be a bartender. What a different life he would have led.
I think about that a lot too. And I think sometimes it's natural to start going, but for this would have happened, or but for this wouldn't have happened. And I was trying to work back on the timeline with Chester, and I was talking about it with my husband, and my husband said something that felt very kind of true to me. And he said, Chester's biggest crime is he was born poor. And it seems like when you are born poor, you get put on a path. In looking over Chester's life, his birth into poverty, the circumstances of his upbringing, we use the word choice, but I'm not sure that there were a lot of choices. I think there was a lot of surviving. And I think if there's like one word that I could use to describe Chester, it's survival. I mean, even, I mentioned in the introduction, he supported the family growing up by hunting in the woods, just every day trying to survive in a house with no running water, with no electricity, hunting in the woods, trying to put food on the table, joining the military to try to get a chance at a better life and get out of, poverty. And I think Chester is this sort of, fascinating case study in the cycle of poverty, and that mixed with these really heinous and unfortunate circumstances. I don't know where Chester would have made a different turn that would have saved him from this fate. And I'm just, it could have been putting in his application at Starved Rock, but maybe not. Maybe, maybe Chester would have been doing something else in LaSalle that would have also put him, I don't know, and it's like that's what haunts me.
Yeah. I want to say one other thing too. It's been a quest for justice for Chester Weger, but it's also, I don't want to forget the victims. Yeah. The three women, Frances Murphy, Lillian Oding, Mildred Lindquist, they deserve justice as to what really happened.
Yeah.
Those three women deserve justice to what's really the truth. What really happened here? Who is behind this? Who knew it? How did it come about? I thought we presented some pretty compelling evidence that cast some suspicion on Robert Murphy. We backtrack, we had Roy Tyson saying, Smokey Rona said he was approached by the Chicago Mafia. One of the husbands wanted his wife killed. Melissa Smith, grandfather within the Chicago Mafia, said one of the husbands wanted his wife killed. There was even an editorial in, remember that article back in the day from like the pastor at the Presbyterian Church in Riverside,
Mm-hmm.
basically saying, it's unfair to cast these aspersions on Robert Murphy. I would note that Bill Jansen, who was a young college student who worked along with the Illinois State Police for several months, and his project was to help investigate the Starved Rock murders, did a whole report. He mentioned that it was a crime of vengeance. It was maybe somebody tied up in the rackets, was the word he used. He said that Moline, there was a tie into Moline, and there should be looked at there. Robert Murphy was from Moline. We also noted on this podcast that Robert Murphy, 2 years after the murders, married a Marian Anderson. Marian Anderson had given birth to a baby boy 2 months before the murders. I would have liked to have known more about that. That person declined to do a DNA test, which is their right, but it would have been interesting to see who the biological father was. I think if the biological father would have been Robert Murphy, don't you think that would have changed the narrative?
Oh, I mean, it would, it would, I mean, it gives so much motive. You've got a man who's very powerful. We've mentioned this before on this podcast, who is, general counsel. He's the head lawyer for Borg Warner, who makes all of the engines for Detroit car makers in the 60s. And this guy had argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. He's a powerful man who has a secretary who gives birth 1 month before his wife, who he was in, apparently through, what we've researched, not a great marriage with. The secretary gives birth and his wife is dead. And 2 years later, he marries the secretary and the child takes his name. And
yeah,
it cannot be dismissed. It cannot be dismissed as motive.
No, and I think, to be fair, and just one thing I will note for the record, to be completely as accurate as I can, when the Will County State's Attorney's Office interviewed that boy who was, his mom was Marian Anderson, who's now an adult, he denied that she was ever a secretary for him. I don't know if it's true or not, whether she was or wasn't. I don't know. I'm just going to say that's what he said. Mm-hmm. But clearly, it's fair game to look at any of the husbands. It's fair game to look at this as a possible motive. So I just think that is always kind of where you would start as a detective. I think you'd start with the husbands. And I will note, without getting into the details too much, because I didn't want to necessarily do that in this podcast, but Frances Murphy is the one who's missing the tip of her left index finger post-mortem. Mm-hmm. She's the one whose autopsy has soiled clothing. She's the one whose autopsy has the vaginal bruising. That can't be ignored. I just think sometimes when people tell the Star Rock story, they're not talking about the missing fingertip and the soiled clothing, because in Chester's interrogation, after he had confessed, when they take him out for the reenactment the next morning, asking him if he defecated or urinated on any of the women. I mean, my God, they knew that that's what happened. And you just know this 21-year-old kid on his dishwasher on his break not only didn't murder these women, but didn't pull his pants down and defecate and urinate on just Miss Murphy. It's insane to think that.
I was thinking back to just our timeline of things, and you and I first met actually over the phone in the summer of 2018, so about 7 years ago. And we were talking, we met over a different issue, but I think what was supposed to just be a touching base conversation ended up evolving into you and I sharing our love of investigation. And you said, I got one for you, Whitney, that is just a story rich and ripe for investigation. You started telling me about Star Rock. Now, I had never heard of it because I'm from California, so it was not on my radar. And the very first thing that popped in my mind when you gave me just this very cursory overview of the case goes back to the question of motive. Is you tell me the story and I'm like, wait, so a 21-year-old kid in the snow takes a lunch break, trudges out to the woods, bludgeons 3 women to death to the point that one is almost decapitated. Then fireman carries them into a cave, arranges their bodies, somehow cleans up, and within an hour is back washing dishes like nothing has ever happened. And to me, now, I did not know in the summer of 2018 any of this, right? All I knew is the sort of Wikipedia version, right, that you gave me in a short conversation on the phone. And the very first thing that came to my mind when you told me the story as a complete tabula rasa, right, to this case was this sounds like a husband with a motive.
It's funny you say that. I've had that same experience with several friends I've told the story to. Numerous people, the first thing they say is, oh, did they look at one of the husbands? I bet it was one of the husbands. And then I tell them some of the facts, they're like, oh my God, everybody, I mean, not everybody, but so many people I've told about this, their first reaction is, what about the husbands? And in fact, if you remember, There was a letter. I got to find this. I'll post it on the podcast website. There was a letter written to maybe Sheriff Utsi, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It was a friend of his. It was on stationery, and he was asking, this guy's opinion on what do you think of this crime. And one of the things the writer said was, did any of the husbands have some babe he was running around with on the side? Exactly what we're talking about. And I would love to have the full case file. I think what you and I have had access to is a sliver, a tiny little sliver, because there would have had to have been investigation by the Illinois State Police into the husbands, into some of these things. We're missing the Bill Jansen 40-page report. I would have loved to have seen all this and to really dive in there. None of that's there. But
Andy,
when you go back to motive, you're right.
So sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you about it. Let me ask you this. I just time travel with me. You're an attorney, but you're practicing in 1960, and you are asked to investigate this case in conjunction with state police. Where do you start? Where would you have started if we were to go back in time and you were running this investigation?
Well, I think I always start with the physical evidence, which I believe they did. I mean, I think the crime scene was, for 1960, pretty meticulously cataloged. I mean, including the hairs found on the left index finger of Francis Murphy. And then there's all kinds of fibers, these red Orlon fibers that were found. There was all kinds of things collected at the crime scene. I always start with that. Now, back in 1960, they didn't have too much of an ability to do much with that trace evidence. But I would start there. Then I think you start with the husbands. I don't think it's any coincidence that these were three wealthy women, powerful men. It wasn't. That just raises a little more of an eyebrow to me.
Right.
That who were the victims? It didn't seem random. So I would start, with the husbands, and I kind of work my way out. And also you've got so many leads. Like I think it was John Kovalik who's driving by and sees a car at the side of the road, a guy talking to three women. Sounds like it's the three victims. There's two more guys at least in the car, right? But here's the biggest bombshell, Whitney. This is where I would start. This is where I would start, and I would end. When you get the Lois Zelensek memo, it is a bombshell. I mean, if I would have gotten that memo, I would have been, holy shit, this lady cracked the case.
Yeah. And
I would have been all over Glenn Palmatier and William Palmatier and their story. I mean, that's what just fell by the wayside. And it took some real power in my mind, some real influence to make that go away.
Yes.
To basically have, I think Glenn Palmatier, I personally think the phone call from the payphone in the bar was made by Lupe Cardenas. That sounds most logical to me. So I think Glenn Palmatier could truthfully deny making the call. Now, he'd be lying about knowing what was going on, because the Illinois State Police, in that interview with Glenn Palmatier, said they're in there doing surveillance like all the time, and they'd always see him talking to Lupe Cardenas. And then the call goes to Bill Palmatier. He gets the call. Yeah. So I would have been all over the Palmatier brothers and Lupe Cardenas. And in the file you and I have, all we've got is the Lois Zelensek 2-page Illinois State Police report. We've got the transcript of Glenn Palmatier's little interview. The one with William is missing. And then we got polygraph reports down the road, like, way down the road, where, oh, lo and behold, the brothers are found to be truthful, and Lois Zelensek's found to be untruthful, which was such total BS, complete nonsense. So that was the case. Yeah. That was the case. I look at it this way. My closing argument PowerPoint to court, my final slide had two names on it. It just said Lois Zelensek, Francis Murphy. And you know what? Those were the two heroes. Those were the two women that cracked the case. Francis Murphy by grabbing some hair from her attacker's head. And Lois Zelensek, what are the odds she would hear this, right? What are the odds she would get back onto that phone call and hear all the things she heard? And to me, what's also, we've talked about this, but it's now bringing up all this passion with me again. Oh my gosh, it's getting me so fueled up again. When you see all the things she heard on the call, the details she provided about, they're talking about cars, sounds like they're talking about a car transaction. Turns out William Palmetier owns a car dealership. She's troubled. She's concerned about the confidentiality. She's thinking about talking to her priest. She's an honest, hardworking telephone operator, has no reason to lie, clearly talking about the Starved Rock murders. To think that all got blown away in the air. And then think about this. Remember how like within, like, I think Glenn Palmetier, the transcript of interview is like August 31st. Remember then the immediate letters, like to the brothers?
Yeah,
like,
so we're so
I think
sorry.
one was from Harlan Warren.
Yes.
Yeah, we're so sorry we had to drag your name through this horrible thing. I mean, we're so sorry. And then Craig Armstrong, State's Attorney Armstrong, saying it's 1,000 to 1 shot that this has anything to do with the Starved Rock murders. That's where I would have started, Whitney, and that's where I would have focused the entire time.
So this is a point that I think is worth making, that generally in the law, evidence is given slightly more credibility when it is given and it is not in your best interest, right? When you are sharing information with the court that may not present you in a favorable light or may actually be injurious to you, that is considered to have weight and credibility, just because why would you do something that's against your best interest? Lois Zelensek had absolutely nothing to gain by coming forward with this information. In fact, she only potentially had a risk of being sanctioned at her job for an ethics violation, because in 1960 you weren't supposed to listen or report anything you heard. She only had the potential to implicate herself with some nefarious people, right? She went to her priest. This was only against her interest to come forward, other than for her conscience's sake. And so I feel like the fact that then, she wasn't deemed credible and her polygraph was considered suspect. I find it so infuriating that this woman takes the time, makes the effort to be what I hope every good citizen would be in this country, and that is forthright and honest, even if it is not in your interest, in the name of justice. And she does that, and she gets kicked in the face for it. Right? It makes me so angry. It's unbelievable. Every time I go back and read that interview, and then there's so many, every time I read it, something else jumps out to me. And the last time I read it, what jumped out to me with the very end was the Illinois State Police people that are drafting the memo, who interviewed her, said they found her to be most sincere. Right. And then they note that, and the people we talked to from the Aurora Police Department also found her to be most sincere. So let's backtrack. She tells this story to her neighbor, Gladys Brummel, who, bless her heart, Gladys, if you're out there, thinking about you. She was 91 the last time we spoke, probably 92 now. Gladys Brummel tells her husband, Jim, who's an Aurora police officer. He hears the story and he says, "Oh, Lois, we gotta report this." So they get out of the Aurora police station and she gets interviewed. And then obviously they find her to be credible, because it goes up the chain to the Illinois State Police, who are investigating the case at that time. And everything about her is so credible. I still can't believe, it makes me crazy that all evaporated. Mm-hmm. How does somebody make that all evaporate, Whitney? How does that all go away? Think of the power. Yeah. And what people don't realize, and you and I know, and we've said, I think the Chicago Mafia was involved in this. We've talked about this here. One of the husbands wanted his wife killed. Chicago Mafia is enlisted to do it. 1960, the Chicago Mafia had their tentacles everywhere. People don't realize the Mafia was involved not only in organized crime, but in local government, in police, in police forces, politicians. Those tentacles in farming subsidies. I mean, in everything. It spread everywhere.
So the influence that was exerted back in the day is truly astonishing, to think that this could all evaporate, is really incredible. And I still can't believe that it happened that way. And of course the brothers are going to deny it. Duh, Yeah. But I would love to know whether there was any other investigation done by the Illinois State Police, because then what happens, if you remember, in the fall, September, late September, that's when Harlan Warren takes over, does his own secret rogue investigation. And that's when everything goes south with Chester Weger. It's Harlan Warren, it's Deputy Dummett, it's Deputy Hess, and then they're doing their own little bullshit investigation. And that's when we go down the Chester Weger path. That's all the Harlan Warren investigation, And it's amazing that the Palmatier brothers just evaporated. That's the best way I can say it. They just evaporated.
They not only evaporate from the police record, they both died before the decade was over. And so they just sort of are these shadowy, mysterious figures to me. Even just trying to investigate them as historical persons, not even associated with this case. They both have pretty rich political careers, in both law enforcement and local government, and they're successful businessmen. And then they're dead by the end of the decade, and there's nothing. The trail dies with them, and it's again, there's few things in life that infuriate me as much as not being able to follow a lead further and just not knowing. And I want to know about them so much, and I don't know where else to scratch to find out.
This is what's interesting too, if you think about it. I think about sometimes how many people were in on this. So let's just focus on what we know with the Zelensek memo. So you've got the caller, let's say that's Lupe Cardenas, who I think it is, because she describes, the detail in that memo, my gosh, it sounds like a burly guy, limited vocabulary. She talked about the way he spoke. Sounds like Lupe Cardenas. So the caller knows that there's this other guy who's got buddy overalls in the trunk of a car. Why does the caller know that? The caller knows that. Whether it's Glenn Palmatier or Lupe Cardenas, they know. Right. And then they're calling Bill Palmatier, and he knows. And he's like, yeah, tell the guy to just burn the clothes. So let's pause. Why do those three people know? Okay? They know. And the guys down in the canyon know. The people that hired them know. One or more of the husbands know. I think it's a much bigger pool of people that know.
As my grandpa said, if a man knows, there's probably a good chance his significant other knows. So there's probably girlfriends and wives and, romantic partners who probably know. And I think sometimes, the thought that comes to my mind is, it's in a slightly different context, obviously, but Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil. And I think it is fascinating how something horrible can be taking place, like the railroading of a young man or the cover up of a brutal triple murder. And people can live in a sort of comfortable silence about it. I know, but I'm not going to say anything. There's this banality of evil. And I feel like, it's so ubiquitous, and I feel like it's on full display here, that obviously, to your point, lots of people knew. And they didn't only know, they were casually discussing it from a payphone to a home phone.
Yeah.
Over a line that a telephone operator could listen in on.
Right.
There's exactly a casualness to this that, to me, speaks to a level of confidence they're just not going to get caught. Because even if people find out, they're not going to be on the hook for it. Which, again, it feels to me like there is a conspiracy, and a comfortable conspiracy, in the sense that these are individuals with power and the ability to pull strings, who have zero fear of being caught, because who cares?
Well, William Palmatier then becomes the mayor of Peru the next year.
Right.
Glenn Palmatier worked for the mayor. I think, these were powerful people.
I believe.
And I think
Glenn that ran for police chief of Aurora. They had for the area that's known as Capone's cornfields, they had very prominent political careers.
And here's the thing too. When you go back and look at that interview of Glenn Palmatier by the Illinois State Police, they ask him about Lupe Cardenas. That's something that they are aware of. The Illinois State Police bring that name up.
Right.
So they've seen this guy in the bar, this big burly guy who's apparently this like Indian chief. So they know his name.
Yeah.
The Illinois State Police know this. They say, hey, we see you talking to this guy every day, Lupe the Chief Cardenas. Mm-hmm. And so Glenn Palmatier is confronted with that. He knows that they have seen him. They say, we see you talking to him every day. Do you know? And then they say to him, do you know that he's got this, he's mixed up with a lot of criminal activity or gambling or something? And Glenn Palmatier is like, oh, I don't know anything about that. So they clearly know he's got links. I think they said to gambling. They know he's like a hoodlum. And then when you and I did our research, and you just go to newspapers.com, you see that he was arrested. I think it was it 1970 maybe, in that hijacking of that truck that contained all the silver.
Yeah.
And he gets a prison sentence with a bunch of other Chicago outfit guys. Mm-hmm. So he's clearly got links to the Chicago Mafia. And then there's a whole chapter.
Right.
There's a chapter dedicated to Lupe the Chief Cardenas in the Capone's Cornfields book about the mob in the Illinois Valley.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because he had a persona of being this Native American individual. And so they called him the chief because he was enormous and he was, he was physically imposing and he was psychologically imposing as well, apparently on people. He was very intimidating. He was Mexican American and had worked his way into this role as you couldn't write a better character for a Scorsese film. Right. Oh. This role of basically being an enforcer. Like, you need something done, you call the chief. You call the chief. You call Lupe Cardenas, and it's fascinating to read his jacket, right? To read whatever you can find on him, because he feels like he feels like a character that should be in a Scorsese movie, hasn't been written yet, this guy needs to be immortalized in cinema because he's just so nefarious.
It's like you and I are writing a scripted version. We right. go, who should we have be on the phone call? Like, oh, let's have it a big burly chief. We scripted this. The other thing is, there was an article, I've talked about this, I think it was on the 40th anniversary of the murder, so it would have been 2000. Harlan Warren is quoted as saying, the Illinois State Police, I thought they knew what they were doing, but they clearly didn't, because they first thought the Illinois mob the Chicago mob was involved. What? I mean, so when I talk about this Chicago Mafia connection, it's not some theory I cooked up.
Right.
It's not something I figured out. It's not something I invented. I'm just looking at what's before me. I'm looking at Lupe Cardenas being brought up in this interview with Glenn Palmatier, and he's connected to the Chicago Mafia. And Harlan Warren said he thought the Chicago Mafia, the Illinois State Police thought maybe the Chicago Mafia was involved. I mean, it's just... they're plain as day. It's not something that you and I just speculate about.
Right. I think to the casual listener who maybe pops into an episode of this podcast and hasn't gone to the website and looked at the documents that are uploaded, hasn't listened to the whole timeline that we've presented, might go, oh, Whitney and Andy are spitballing fun theories that do sound like a Scorsese movie, or do sort of sound like an episode of Wives with Knives, or reverse, right? Husbands Who Kill, right? But go and look at all of the documentation from 1960. We did not invent this, right? We did not invent any of this, to your point. And I remember, I'm kind of segueing us in a slightly different direction here, but one of the points of frustration that I had prior to the Zelensek memo was that nothing connected dots for me. It was like, well, this looks obvious, and this looks obvious, and this looks obvious. What is the connection? Who are the links in this chain? And then I remember I get a phone call from you after you'd been spending the weekend going through all of these, old files you'd gotten from the state. And I don't think I've ever heard you use as many expletives as excitedly in one sentence. But you got, and I'll in case children are listening, I'll save us the words. But you read me the Zelensek memo, and then I think it was just like 5 minutes of you saying "holy shit" actually in a row. And yeah. I feel like for me, that memo made it so that is the DNA important? Sure. It's not necessary for me, right? At this point, is the, is additional physical evidence helpful? Sure. It's not necessary for me. I feel like that memo is enough for me. If I put myself back in 1960 in a jury box, that to me goes doubt. I
Yeah.
doubt the entire story that the state is
Absolutely.
telling me. I'm done. I don't need DNA. I don't need more hearsay from other people who have a relative who has a relative who has a relative who knows something. That memo is enough for me. And so, I mean, it's not that those other things don't matter and don't kind of paint a richer picture, but that memo was what I personally needed to feel like, now this makes sense. Now the dots connect.
You know, as much as I've said about the Lois Zelensek memo over the years, everything I've said, I still believe, and I've talked about it at length, and I've called it a bombshell 100 times. I still think I have not given it the significance it deserves. You cannot overstate how significant that memo was. And what's fascinating to me is how criminals screw up sometimes and get caught. So let's think about this Idaho murders. This Brian Koberger kid, right? He goes through all this like planning. He buys this knife on Amazon and he's planned this whole thing out. He's driven by their house according to cell phone records like in the months before, and he's got this elaborate plan. And then you know what? He forgot the knife sheath in the house. Mm-hmm. And then they get DNA on it. They do genetic genealogy with Othram, and it's traced back to him. And it's like, because this kid's DNA is not in CODIS, mm-hmm. The DNA database. It's that knife sheath. And it's like, damn, I forgot the knife sheath. Mm-hmm. Leopold and Loeb, the classic University of Chicago law students, I think they left glasses. One of them left their glasses at the crime scene. Like, damn, I left the glasses at the crime scene. Here, damn, we were on that payphone. And at the exact moment I'm talking about, the guy with bloody overalls still has, he says, hey, boy, they sure had a big write-up on the murders in tonight's paper. The kid still has the bloody overalls in the trunk of the car. He's afraid he'll get caught. And the other guy says, well, tell him to get rid of him, burn him. Are you kidding me? At that moment, the little old lady telephone operator comes on the line. And not only a little old lady telephone operator, one who's sharp as a tack, and heard all this conversation, and the hairs on her arms probably spiked. I mean, what are the odds of that? And it wouldn't have been unbelievable. I mean, she cracked the case. Mm-hmm. It would have come back to that. Like, it'd have been like, oh, you two dopes, you're talking about this on a payphone, Right. Like, that's what should have happened.
Right. And it didn't. And not only is there no further investigation of those individuals, but those individuals, as you previously mentioned a few minutes ago, get apology letters.
Oh my God, profuse.
In what other context in your career in the law have you ever seen anyone who's been part of a police investigation get an apology letter? Like,
right away too. Like,
right.
Oh, we're so sorry.
Like it, and the tone of them is almost groveling. Like it's one thing to send a form letter that says like, we apologize for this inconvenience. You are no longer considered, a person of interest. Have a good day, right? There's that tone. Like, that's not the tone of these letters. The tone of these letters is, please forgive us for this horrible injustice we've done to you by even, by deigning to think that you could be for daring to think you could be implicated.
And my recollection is that the Glenn Palmetier interview was August 31st. And I think one of these letters was the next day. It was like September 1st.
Yeah.
So it's immediate. It's as soon as they just denied it. So of course he's going to deny it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I also think not only with the Zelensek memo, then I think about this. I think about the person that recovered the hairs on Miss Murphy's left index finger. Okay. There's no DNA testing back in 1960. Now we know like the significance of this, but somebody thought, we need to collect these and inventory these. The Illinois State Police etch on the slide with a diamond stylus exactly where the hairs came from, her left index finger. And to think that 60 plus years later, we have technology that we can determine whose hair that was. Mm-hmm. It's so fascinating that we can do that, and it's so amazing that we can do it. And what's even more incredible is not only with the Zelensek memo, we've now got DNA result, the male profile, not Chester Weger. We now know it's one of these three local brothers, Edward Bray being the most likely. And still, are you kidding me? Still? The conviction has not been vacated? Despite all this, it's like, what is going on here? I mean, I feel like nothing would matter. I could have a videotape of the killers walking out of St. Louis Canyon, and people be like, well, I think the tape's doctored.
Right,
or I think, you know,
fake.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, what would it take? This case, what is it about this case that we are still in a situation where the conviction has been upheld, and all this evidence has not been enough legally, you know? It's incredible. It's really, if you really think about it, it's really stunning. Which
to me solidifies in my mind how high up it goes. This is a can of worms no one wants to open. Because once you start peeling the layers of this onion, it's dirty and ugly and really, really exposes a lot of corrupt individuals. And I think, you know, we are 65 years on, true, but the reach of a lot of those people didn't end when they passed. You know, that they set in motion, I think, a chain of events that utilized Chester Weger as a patsy so that this would just never come back to bite any of them or their legacies.
It's really incredible. And I just think of, you know, having you on this podcast, and I think of the journey we've been on the last 3+ years, and just our organic, you know, it seemed like every week we were learning something new, having another, like, I think at some point the word bombshell got so overused. It's like, oh, really, another bombshell? But it was, you know,
right.
One thing after another. I still am just blown away by how much we have learned from a case that was so old. And I'm also so intrigued by knowing that there's so much I don't know that is buried in those files that I'll never get a chance to see, that I'd love to get a chance to see. And I'm still hopeful that there's something out there, that there's something or someone out there that's going to shed further light on this. And let me talk about one other thing, and we haven't really gotten into this. So, you know, Melissa Smith said her grandfather was in the Chicago Mafia, told her that this is a Chicago Mafia thing. He picked the guys who went down there to do this because one of the husbands wanted his wife killed. Okay. His name was Roy Grizzy. Well, we learned that Mr. Grizzy had 4 brothers, one of whom was Al Grizzy. Al Grizzy, we found newspaper articles in 1961 that he was, I think, the licensee, so almost like the liquor licensee of something called the Devonshire Hotel, which was a notorious like mob kind of headquarters on the north side of Chicago. A lot of Chicago mobsters were linked to the Devonshire Hotel. There were articles about Al Grizzy, you know, in 1961. So it's, again, that's Al Grizzy. It's no stretch to think his brother might also have some kind of affiliation with the Chicago Mafia. So again, all the things we're bringing up, these aren't some wild, you know, it's not like we're saying, oh, you know, like all this has some corroboration and makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, factually, the dots are all kind of connected. And even with Edward Bray, the fact that he died 2 days after the bodies, that the women's were murdered. So he was 60 years old, single, security guard at the Seneca shipyards. Okay. And I talked about this on another podcast that I just did where I was surprised the court was like doubtful that like a 60-year-old would be involved in a crime. And it's like, I just think that is absolutely silly. I mean, what about a 60-year-old security guard at the Seneca shipyards is no less capable of murder than a 21-year-old dishwasher on his lunch break at the Starved Rock Lodge.
Yeah.
I mean, and in fact, the fact that he died 2 days later, to me, sounds awfully suspicious.
Right. I mean, look, the circumstances of his death, just to remind people, was he's the night watchman again at this munitions plant, right? He is found slumped over the steering wheel of his snowplow the same morning the women's bodies are found. And that feels, it's a very macabre scene too, right? We've got we've got the women displayed in the snow in the cave, and we've got this guy slumped over his snow encrusted snowplow, in the shipyards. And okay, he's 60 years old. I mean, I to your point, I don't think that he at 60 is any less capable of trudging back into that canyon than Chester Weger would have been at 21. Walking to that canyon is not, I don't think, that's not the question here. The question is, could any one person, whether they were 60 or 21, have committed this murder by themselves? And I think the answer is no. So I think a 60-year-old man with other individuals is a much more plausible explanation than one lone 21-year-old dishwasher who comes back clean as a whistle, right? Because, I mean, let's just point out that other issue. Chester comes back to the lodge.
Yeah, it comes back to work. So
yeah,
the police would have been interviewing everybody working that night and said, hey, did you see Chester that night when he came back? What did he look like? What did you see? Right. Nobody testified at the trial to seeing anything suspicious on Chester's face, body, or clothing the afternoon and night of the murders.
It's going to sound really gross what I'm about to say, but I mean, the amount of injury inflicted to those women, Chester would have come back looking like a Jackson Pollock painting of blood, right? I mean, the splatter would have been unbelievable. We know Chester comes back to work and no one says anything. No one notices. We don't know what Edward Bray was doing, right? All we know is that 2 days later, Edward Bray is found dead.
And to the point about him being 60, well, yeah, maybe the stress of being involved in this physical altercation and this triple murder gave him a heart attack. Okay.
Right.
So
or
I don't think that's a big stretch, Yeah.
Or his hairs are found in the severed fingertip, implying he's the one that maybe cut it off. Right.
Could be.
And maybe that upset someone. Maybe that was not part of the plan.
Who knows?
Who knows? And so maybe something was retaliatory against him for taking a finger souvenir. I don't know.
And by the way, and there's a million points like this. So at our evidentiary hearing, I had retained a forensic pathologist. His name was Dr. David Fowler. And part of his testimony about the missing fingertip was that little part of the missing fingertip had bone in it. He said, it is difficult to cut through bone. You have to use some force. It's not easy. It's not like you can just take a pair of kitchen scissors and cut somebody's fingertip off, And that, again, goes all of these things that the police knew, okay? The missing fingertip alone should have disproved this bogus Chester Weger confession. And, so many people that I've met locally, they just are dismissive of the case because they're just saying one guy couldn't have done it. Little Chester Weger could not have corralled the three women and got their bodies up into a cave and killed all three. I mean, just simply on that alone, But when you combine it with all the other things, and even the idea we talk about, if you play it out, he's on his lunch break, so he's going to rob three women that presumably are guests at the lodge. Really? Like you're going to rob them and then you're going to accidentally kill one? Seems like extremely unlikely. And then you got to have to kill the other two. But in order to do it, you're going to bash their skulls in and make their faces unrecognizable. Everybody, this is what I go back to, Whitney. And this
then
is
you're going to defecate on them. And they're going to take the time to arrange their bodies and defecate on them.
This is what I go back to when we found that videotape of a 2010 Illinois Continuing Legal Education presentation that was put on by the Illinois Bar, where Tony Reculia, the prosecutor, was one of the speakers in 2010. So he's now probably in his 70s. And he said some stunning things. He said the confession was absolutely ridiculous. And he went to Bill Richardson, who was kind of his boss, who he tried the case with, because Tony Reculia was like 1 year out of law school. He just graduated law school.
He was 26. He was 3 months out of law school.
Yeah. And he says, Bill, it couldn't have happened this way. This is absolutely ridiculous. And he says, Richardson looks at him and says, well, what are you going to do about it? He says, I'm just going to tell the jury this is how it happened. They knew, Whitney. They knew it didn't happen this way. Everybody knew it didn't happen this way. And in fact, in my closing argument, the evidentiary hearing, I had a whole PowerPoint slide where I read Mr. Reculia's closing argument. At the very end, he said, Chester Weger doesn't deserve 199 years in the penitentiary. Chester Weger doesn't deserve 299 years in the penitentiary. He doesn't deserve 399 years in the penitentiary. He deserves to be electrocuted. That just blew my mind, because in a case where you personally believe the confession's absolutely ridiculous, it's got to raise some real doubts in your mind about whether this guy did it. Tony Reculia claimed that, he felt Chester was guilty. He had his own theories why. And obviously the decision to ask for the death penalty would have come much higher up the chain. It wouldn't have been Mr. Reculia's decision. It would have been Bill Richardson and the office's decision. So it's on them. But they elect to ask the jury to kill Chester Weger, okay? In a case where I think it's crystal clear that everybody knows there's 100 red flags. And I think it's telling that the jury elected not to, because in 1960, if there was a case where the death penalty was going to be imposed, wouldn't this be one that maybe kind of fit? Mm-hmm. 3 women got bludgeoned to death. It's at a time when
jury, I mean, I'm beating a dead horse here probably, but we know this too from interviews with jurors. They had their doubts, but they're like, well, but he confessed. Because in 1960, there wasn't the understanding of false confessions that we have today. And I imagine a different timeline, right? I imagine the timeline where we won in court on June 18th. But I also imagine a darker timeline, which is, what if, again, the banality of evil had overtaken that jury, and the jury had just gone, yeah, okay, he confessed, and we're gonna go with the prosecution's story. Fire up old Sparky.
Yeah,
let's send him to the electric chair, and then this, you and I would probably never be in conversation.
No,
none of this would happen.
We would not have learned anything we learned. We would have never heard about the hair being traced to one of the 3 Bray brothers. Nobody would have flushed this out. Back then, it was, pre-Brady, people, Brady versus Maryland. The state didn't even have to turn over exculpatory evidence to Chester Weger. Think of what they might have known. We have no idea what else they might have known that they didn't have to turn over. And it's just incredible to think. And it just, I think one of the most stunning things that happened along the way, we talked about the Lois Zelensek interview being a bombshell. I think another one was when Chester had been released on parole, and he's out grocery shopping with his nieces, and a guy even older than him comes up and says, Chester, I know you're innocent. And it's Louis Getch, the 1960 Justice of the Peace local grocer, who during his interview with the Will County State's Attorney's Office said he had never been asked to sign arrest warrants for murder before. It was the one and only time. He was told he's going to sign them. Other judges were mad that, he was doing it. And he thought Chester Weger was innocent. And when I met with him, he called Dummett, he's how he referred to Dummett. He'd say, Bad Billy Dummett. Bad Billy Dummett. Dummett had such a reputation back then. Isn't it incredible that Louis Getch, 95 years old, would run into Chester Weger in a grocery store, recognize him,
right,
and walk up and say, I know you're innocent. It's just another again, it's like we're writing a screenplay. Like you came to me and said, hey, why don't we have the grocer, let's have the Justice of the Peace as a 95-year-old run into Chester Weger at the grocery store. Should we do that? I'd be like, Whitney.
Yeah, that's soapy. Don't do
Come on.
that.
Yeah.
95-year-old Louis Getch, 85-year-old Chester encounter each other on the seasoning aisle.
Is that crazy?
Yeah.
Is that crazy? I just want to say, Whitney, I mean, we could, I just wanted to kind of reminisce, and reminisce is probably not the right word, because reminisce, I think of like meaning like you've got these fond memories. It's what's the word if you're kind of thinking about things that are sad memories or mad memories?
We are doing a post-mortem.
Yeah, that's more
journey.
like it.
Yeah.
And I think of the journey that we've been on together and all the emotional roller coaster that it was. As somebody who, I'm typically on the defense side of the legal cases I do. And I've seen a lot of, people get their convictions vacated on very flimsy evidence. It could be like one witness recants, one gang member recants his testimony and this person's now released from prison. And I've seen this happen a lot. It seems like here in Chicago. And then I think of Chester Weger and all the evidence we amassed, start to finish. And to think that, the conviction stands, it's really incredible. But I am hopeful that, and I firmly believe this, the final chapter of this story has not been written. I know, I said this before. I did a little video on this. I've got a sign around the corner of my office that says, everything in life is an opportunity. Okay. I preach that. This is not the road I was expecting to go down. I was expecting to win at that court hearing. I felt like we met our burden. I thought we proved our case. I thought we should have won. But here I am. And I'm now going down the road less traveled. For some reason, there is an opportunity awaiting me. I don't know what it is. I don't know where it's going to go, but I know this, it's out there. Yeah. It is out there. And I'm going to find it. And I think down the road, there's going to be a podcast episode where you're going to be like, can you believe it, Whitney? Can you believe this? And I would have never found this out unless I was forced to go down this road less traveled. Because if we win, it's over.
Right.
It's over. Right. I mean, we're done. There's nothing, the conviction's vacated. Right. It's over. But now, because it's not, and I'm going down the road less traveled, I have this strong feeling in my gut, and I so trust my gut and my intuition that there's something out there awaiting me, and it's going to come to me at some point. I don't know when, but it's going to come to me.
I mean, I think when I've talked to people who have learned of, the events of the last month, a lot of people go, oh, it's over. And I go, it's not. It is not over. Chester's passing does not mean this is over. Andy's not giving up. The truth is still out there, right? There's still more to tell in this story. And I think the quest for justice only ends when we stop talking about it.
Yeah.
That it ends when we stop talking about it and we stop caring. But as long as people out there keep caring and keep talking about this, it's not over yet.
Yeah. There've been so many things, and I could go on and on and on. I have so many anecdotal stories. So I had one even more recently, maybe this is just a couple months ago. I had a guy reach out to me. He emailed me, and his grandmother was Josephine Schmidt. Oh, she actually was like the bookkeeper at the lodge. She testified at the trial about, basically they had her authenticate that Chester was working on Monday, March 14th, because he picked up his whatever check or whatever. Mm-hmm. So she gave some little testimony on that. He said, this is what he said. He said, I was very close to my grandmother later in life. We would take long walks together all the time. This is the word, I'll never forget this. Gives me goosebumps. He says she was haunted by this verdict. It bothered her. She said that there was some really intimidating police officer back in the day who was like, basically kind of made everybody at the lodge get in line with this Chester Weger story. And it's like, hey, You want us looking at you? Kind of like this intimidation. It sounds like dumb it to me.
Yeah.
But he said this word, he said the word haunted several times, how this haunted her. And yeah, it's just a little anecdotal story, but that has power to me, you know? That just resonates with me, hearing something like that.
It does. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I called her the juror. I mean, witness. I mean, she was a witness to the events of that time, and she, if you know, you use the word haunted, she would have been aware that this didn't make sense, right? That injustice was playing out in front of her. And I mean, I think that I would give anything to be able to go back in time and talk to so many of the people that were there and participating in this who we've lost over the intervening 6.5 decades. I would just give anything to be able to go back and talk to them and just get a little detail here and a little detail there and confirm a little bit of the timeline. And yeah.
You know, what'd be great if I could kind of script it would be, I get a call one day and say, hey, you know, Joe Smith, hey, I bought the house that apparently back in the day Harlan Warren used to live in, and we went down in the basement, and we there was like a area here that, you know, nobody had ever been down in, and, you know, it was like a wooden door, and we found a couple boxes of documents relating to the Starved Rock murder. Would you like to see them?
Right.
And you get in there, all the good stuff, all the stuff that got buried, the interviews with the Palmatier brothers, the interviews about the mafia, stuff about the husbands, you know, like all the stuff in there that we never got our paws on. Something like that. The other thing, it's either that, I would still love the ability. What's so frustrating to me was that once we were in the post-conviction context with our lawsuit, you know, we were, the standard is, you know, I have to have new evidence, okay? So some of the things I wanted to forensically test, and the way the Illinois statute is, it pretty much just allows DNA testing. It's vague. It hasn't really been used for like what I'll call trace evidence, because non-DNA evidence doesn't have the ability to necessarily prove your innocence, but it can provide such clues, you know? So like Skip Palnick and Chris Palnick at Microtrace, they've assisted in solving so many big cases through trace evidence, like the Atlanta child murders. Mm-hmm. I think his name was Wayne Williams. Like they matched carpet fiber from his house to fibers found on the bodies. The Green River serial killer, paint chips found on Gary Ridgway to the DuPont plant. Let's say those red Orlon fibers would have come back to, you know, the mat, the carpet mat of a 1958 Oldsmobile, which was a car spotted in the area. So now you're thinking, somebody was in that car, or you know, or you could have tested other things that might be out there. You know, we tried to test a lot of other stuff. I mean, it'd just be fascinating to really test other things and see what other clues and see what other things you learn about the case. I wish I had access to all the evidence right now and I could do all that.
I know. I think about that too, just how much there is still left to learn if we could access more. I mean, but as you said, everything is an opportunity, and even turns in the road that are not the turns we wanted to take.
I'm telling you,
taking you to a different destination.
I could give you so many examples of this in life where something happens that you weren't expecting. It's an opportunity.
Right.
You know,
right.
Somebody gets laid off of their job. Oh, damn, I got laid off my job. And then you know what? 2 months later, they can't believe they found this much better job.
Right.
Things happen, and there's opportunity here now. There's opportunity here. Absolutely. It's, I don't know when I'm going to run into it. It's all around me. I'm confident, though, that I will. I'm confident that the last chapter of the Chester Weger Starved Rock murder saga has not been written yet. And I also want justice for Francis Murphy, Lillian Oding, and Mildred Lindquist. They are entitled to have the truth out there about who really murdered them?
Yeah.
Who really viciously and brutally murdered them? Let's not forget about them and the justice that they deserve. So having said that, is there any final thoughts? I mean, we'll be back, you and I. This isn't the last podcast. This is just for now, us just kind of doing our post-mortem on the case. Is there anything else you want to talk about or say that we haven't touched on?
Yeah. When we started this podcast, around the same time I started law school, and I went back to law school. And I don't know if you remember this. We were sitting at the Bob's Big Boy in Burbank.
I remember it well.
And we were talking, and I said, Andy, do you think it's crazy if I go back to law school? Am I too old? You know, I'm just getting married. I'm starting a family. I've already got a career. You know, I mean, is this crazy for me to go back to law school? And you said, it's not crazy. Why would it be crazy? You know? And I said, because I just feel like we're investigating these case files, and I want to know more. I want to be able to understand more. And so I did. And so I went back to law school, and I graduated 6 weeks ago. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And I think at every step of the way while I was in school, I kept thinking of Chester, and I kept thinking of Mildred Lindquist and Lillian Oding and Frances Murphy, and thinking, I have to learn these things because understanding this matters for getting justice for them, right? For the future Chester Weigers out there, the future victims of crimes. So even if we didn't get the exoneration for Chester, I hope that there is a little bit of legacy here that is thanks to the victims and to Chester for encouraging me to make a substantial change in my life in the hopes of doing something better for society. And I hope that is a positive that we attribute to this, as opposed to just dwelling on the tragedy of it.
That's such an amazing story, and I'm so proud of you. And I remember having that conversation, and I remember going to Big Boy because that's like the original Big Boy, right? Isn't that the first one?
Yeah, it's Fantastic Pancakes.
Yeah. And so I tell the story a lot, and I'm gonna make it a little bit longer. What I say is Chester gets convicted 1961. He's sitting in his prison cell, his first day in prison. So he gets convicted. You go from the courthouse. You're no longer in jail. Now you're going to go to a prison. Okay, they're going to lock the gates and throw away the key. And a little angel shows up and says, hey, don't worry. It's like your little Harry Potter is out there. He's going to be born next year, Harry Potter. His name is Andy. He's going to be born in 1962. Got to go to preschool. Got to go to kindergarten. Got to go to middle school. He's got to go to junior high. He's got to go to high school, college. Got to go to law school. Got to practice law for 25 years before he even hears about you. But he's going to take up your case, and he's going to make tremendous progress on it, and he's going to shine a light on all the injustices. He's going to show you didn't do it. And then I'm going to keep going. And he's going to make a ton of progress. He's going to get real close. And he was so close that he's going to meet a woman named Whitny Braun. She's not a lawyer yet, but he's going to have a conversation with her, and she's going to go to law school. And then she's going to go to law school, and then she's going to have a career. Now she's going to be a lawyer, and she's going to work several more years honing her skills and just taking a deeper dive and hang tight. And then eventually the two of them are going to finally prove once and for all conclusively who the real killers were in the Starbuck murder. Think of that scenario, playing out.
I know. And I've said this before, and maybe I've overused it on this podcast, but I really believe this. You can bury the dead. You cannot bury the truth. So even if we lose people along the way, that does not diminish the quest for the truth.
Absolutely. Amen. So good to see you, Whitny Braun. I look forward to continuing the conversation. We're going to be back here hopefully soon. I have loved every minute of all the podcasts we've recorded.
Same.
You've been amazing. I missed you for the longest time because me doing it solo is so much weaker. You make the show 100 times better. You're so much better at this than I am.
No,
You're so good.
I'm not.
So smart, so articulate. I love hearing you talk. So it's great to have you back, and we're going to do it again, hopefully real soon.
Very soon. Thank you, Andy. I love doing this with you. I love investigating this stuff with you, and thank you to you for encouraging me to do this, because my little hiatus from from the podcast is because I was in law school. And and
plus you had a full-time job,
and I have a toddler named Chad. So it's been a 3-year roller coaster. But I mean, I hope people who are listening to this know that the roller coaster, hopefully, it is staying on the tracks, and it's still heading towards the same goal. They're just taking some detours to get better and hone the ability to research this more.
Yeah. And one last plea, anybody out there, if you know anybody that might know something about the Starved Rock murders, if you have a relative, a cousin, a friend, a brother, a grandmother, reach out to them. Go pay them a visit. Ask them if they know anything. Nothing, no tip is too small. Reach out to Whitney and I. We're all ears. Please, anybody you might know, talk to them. No tip is too small.